IS-BAO SafetyNet Webinar series presented today by Polaris Aero, talking about fatigue risk management, managing a critical hazard to address safety. I'm Catherine Hilst, the IS-BAO Operations Manager, and I do have just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Due to the number of attendees, you all will be on mute, and you stay on mute for the presentation, but there is a place for you to submit your questions or comments, and we welcome those at any time during the session. You'll see a control panel, and there's a little drop down that says questions. Go ahead and submit them there. And as I mentioned, we'll get to those after the presentation in the Q&A session. So super excited about this webinar by Polaris Aero and with guest speaker from Pulsar Informatics talking on fatigue risk management. This webinar will address fatigue as one of the most relevant and undermanaged systemic risks business aviation operations face. Using operational data, reports, and real-life scenarios will demonstrate how to integrate fatigue management into SMS in a structured, simple, and sustainable way. The focus will be on early risk detection, trend analysis, proportional controls, and high-impact preventive measures, showing how small, well-designed actions can generate significant improvements in safety, performance, and operational reliability. Today from Polaris Aero, we have Steve Bruneau. He's the Vice President of Aviation Services at Polaris Aero and is responsible for expanding the company's suite of safety management solutions. Prior to joining Polaris, he was the Chief Operating Officer of Pulsar Informatics, a connection, and delivering fatigue risk management systems to aviation organizations of all FAR types, including their maintenance and ground handling departments. He has over 25 years of process consulting experience helping organizations meet regulatory requirements or achieve new levels of performance. And we also welcome back Meredith Headwell, who is VP of Customer Service at Pulsar Informatics, where she helps high-performance organizations stay sharp when the stakes are high. She works at the front lines of fatigue risk management, turning cutting-edge science into practical systems that protect people and improve performance. Steve, Meredith, welcome back, and I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having us. We're super excited here, and I'm really excited to have Meredith join in this particular topic, of course, because we've been working together, Polaris and Pulsar, for quite some time. Started back when I was at Pulsar and has continued into present day, which is exciting. And we have a lot of great things to share as far as how to manage risk from the very beginning of your scheduling process, or looking at the way you staff your different parts of your operation, all the way through the operational process. And the goal here is to shed light on some things you can think about as far as how to manage and where it fits. But really kind of take the boogeyman out of it. There's a lot of perception that as soon as you start talking about fatigue risk management, everyone's going to start talking about shutting down operations, or no longer flying, or needing to double the head count, all those sorts of things. And we're here to tell you that it's not that black and white. There's going to be a lot of things that you can do to really just think through in a proactive way. And come up with something that just works to mitigate risk, which is really what we're trying to accomplish, right? So, and again, as I said, it's a pleasure having Meredith here as well. Let me get my slides working. Here we go. All right, so today what we want to cover is a little bit of background on fatigue risk management. What is it, and what are some things to think about as you try to manage risk, which in effect is managing overall risk due to fatigue. Ways to look at planning your workloads, your flights, and so forth, to get ahead of fatigue risk. And the earlier you identify these problems, the more opportunity you have to think about how to mitigate, of course. As you approach flight time or work time, what is the criticality of performing an operational risk assessment, right? It's one thing to plan something, but sometimes the plan isn't always how it actually happens. So making sure you're doing a risk assessment right before you do the work to make sure that you're about to do something in the context that was planned for. And then once the work is done, whether it's a flight or maintenance or what have you, debriefing and talking about how did that assignment go? Was there any potential fatigue implications, or could it have been done better? Things of that nature. And then we'll stand back and look at the big picture of the organization, both from an SMS and an FRMS standpoint, to look at it at an oversight level. Managerially, what are we seeing as the big picture, not just the tactical activities that are in the first 4 bullets. So let's start with fatigue is a safety hazard, period, right? I think it's one of those things that oftentimes is not really uncovered. People don't tend to talk about fatigue. They don't want to admit fatigue. Fatigue is driven by a lot of different things, which Meredith will talk about in a few moments. But what I'm showing you here on the screen over on the right is something that ideally within your own SMS, you're able to capture as well. This is something that would come out of our system, but you can start to see in a timeline all the different reporting that came in over time. And the ones that are highlighted, of course, are the ones where fatigue was identified as a causal factor. So when you look at it on a timeline, you start to see, wow, we're starting to have an uptick in fatigue-related incidents. And sometimes those are the things that are a catalyst to being proactive about putting a fatigue risk management program in place, right? And then the chart that you see on the bottom there, again, through your SMS, is to identify what were the deviations and or outcomes that fatigue produced, right? It's one thing to say you're fatigued, it's another to say, well, fatigue produced injury, damage, long landings, all those sorts of things. You want to be able to know that, right? Because that starts to quantify, what it is that you're trying to control for, not just what it is you're controlling. So ideally in your own safety program, and when you do the investigations of reports, you're taking the time to ask questions about the people involved and, where do they think their fatigue level was, and did it factor into, the incident in any kind of way? So you want to capture that. So the important thing here is to appreciate that, fatigue is a hazard. And it does manifest in the safety world into all sorts of, again, negative outcomes and or deviations because of the poor reaction time effect of fatigue and or the bad or delayed judgments that can occur. So obviously, the higher the fatigue, the slower your reaction time, and or more often you're going to have delayed judgments or bad judgments. So those are things that, again, if you don't get ahead of it, you're going to see that chart on the top right corner have a lot more flags on it driven by fatigue, which is something you don't want to do. And again, normally, as I said up front, fatigue is not always a primary factor to an event. It's oftentimes, though, a contributing factor. And I would argue that it's one of the contributing factors that oftentimes the investigation doesn't dig deep enough to really capture. People aren't really always educated in terms of how to ask those kinds of questions or what types of supplemental questions you might want to ask just to get a sense of whether fatigue may have been at play. And I hope when you see what Meredith goes over in terms of all the different fatigue stressors, some of those things will help stimulate some things that you can ask when you're doing the investigation. And then most importantly is tracking this stuff. Fatigue oftentimes is one of those subjective, fuzzy kind of things. Like, how do you feel today? I'm a little fatigued. And when people say that, like, what does that mean? I'm a little fatigued. So we're going to be talking about a way to objectify that, make it more objective. But more importantly, when you then talk about fatigue in the context of safety, you really want to have some way of objectively demonstrating that fatigue is becoming a problem or has been a problem. Just saying, oh yeah, we had a little bit of a fatigue incident. Like, what does that mean, right? But if you start to show charts like the ones I'm showing on the right, people start to nod their head a little bit differently and say, yeah, we can see how fatigue is actually creeping in the organization. There are some things that are happening that we probably don't want to happen, and we better be more proactive. So again, I strongly encourage you to, when you do your SMS investigations, to ask the right level of questions. I'll also point out, though, that fatigue can be mission dependent, right? If you're an operator that flies pretty much, daytime operations, Monday to Friday kind of thing, you're going to have kind of normal fatigue levels. That doesn't mean fatigue won't be present, but you're going to have normal fatigue levels. But if you're someone who flies back of the clock, international operations, nighttime operations, heavy up and down days, things like that, fatigue may be more prevalent. So you really need to think about, what is fatigue in your context of the missions that you guys pursue.
So as Steve mentioned, you want to think about it in context, but the first thing I want to point out is that fatigue is not an individual thing that you want to hide. It is, as this slide says here, a we problem. It is so important that everyone takes responsibility and also looks out for each other. We were just discussing this with one of our clients, but thinking about fatigue, if you see something, say something. Like, if you notice that your coworker seems to be fatigued in any way, say something. If you feel fatigued, you need to say something. We have to be responsible. We have to show up well rested and prepared, but we also need to understand that this is not something that you can push through. And so if you see it somewhere, say something. As I was preparing for this, I was thinking about Lindsey Vonn in the Olympics, which I don't care a ton about skiing, but the Lindsey Vonn story is pretty cool. And so I was following her, and she got injured right before the Olympics. And then she goes and skis anyways. and then immediately major leg injury, and they almost had to amputate her leg. And I was thinking about that, and I thought somebody there should have said, what are you doing? Like, you're going down these hills at many miles an hour. Someone should have stopped her, her coach, her trainer, a fellow athlete. Someone should have said, you are risking your life. You could really injure yourself. And so thinking about this idea that it's a we problem with fatigue, help each other out. And so now let's talk a little bit more specifically here. We are not nocturnal animals. We're not bats. We're not Batman. We're not mice. We are people who typically throughout history, we are awake when the sun is up and we're asleep when the sun is down. And so our biology is what it is. You can't change that. Now, we do have people who have to work sometimes through the night, but you're fighting against your own biology. And so it's important to understand that. It's the first piece, is just that's not how we're made. Now, you can still function and have a great life, but you have to understand that that's not how humans are designed. Now let's talk a little bit about organizational responsibilities. So your organization should be involved. This should be you working with your company. That's the ideal, right? And I know that it's not that perfect scenario everywhere, but there are things that your organization can do to help you. And so one thing that you can do is really think about, how do we schedule flights? How do we schedule duty starts and end times? Thinking of commuting in that. Where is my rest time? Are we managing the schedule well? Because that is half the battle. It really coming in prepared and saying, I am rested, I have done what I needed to do, and now I am showing up, and my schedule also is helpful. It doesn't drain me. Now, if you're working nights, you're just going to have to adjust for that. Obviously, you work in a hangar and you're servicing airplanes at 2 a.m., that's the time you have to work. But what can you do to prepare yourself, and how can your organization accommodate that? Thinking about time zone management, and I'm just going to go through this really quickly, but how do you manage your off time? So, you're changing time zones, you're managing your time off, crew resourcing. Are you doing all the things like pre-positioning when necessary? I know that's expensive, but is it a possibility? Is it a possibility to augment? Sometimes even witching out crew. If you show up and you're like, if you see something, say something. I can't do it. Like, don't be afraid to raise your hand. I was just listening to this crash that happened in Wisconsin. It was, I want to say 2017 or 19, and it was a helicopter, but you could hear the pilot saying, I can't keep my eyes open. And literally within 3 minutes, the whole helicopter crashes, everyone in the helicopter is dead. It's heartbreaking. And he was trying to say something. And so we need to start being aware of that. And then commuting time, which I already mentioned. So yeah.
Yeah, I think commuting time, I just want to add to that. Commuting time is important. I was just on a call with some FBOs recently, and we were talking about this specific thing, and it was a busy time of the year. It was winter time. He left really early in the morning before the sun even came up, fell asleep at the wheel on the way home, had a crash. Fortunately, he wasn't killed or seriously injured, but seriously could have been. And the key here is, while that isn't fatigue on the duty or on the clock with your business, the fact is it's your employee who you hope to come back the next day. So fatigue is real, not just when they're working for you, it's real throughout life.
Yes, that was a great point. Okay, so let's talk about flight and duty rules. So there are 3 main causes of fatigue. Now there's more, and one of the ones we get a lot is, well, what about hard work? Like, hard work, hard workload, high workload. These are the 3 main ones. Yes, that matters. But the 3 that we have found scientifically that make the biggest difference is sleep debt, long days, and time of day. So let's talk about those quickly. So sleep debt. Everyone needs between 7 to 9, sometimes even 6 and 10 hours of sleep. Now, if you're a long sleeper, my best friend is a long sleeper, and she always apologizes. Meredith, you can see my watch. I'm so sorry. I slept 9 hours. Like, why are you apologizing? That's what your body needs. It's not bad. It doesn't mean you're lazy. Albert Einstein was a long sleeper, but we all have a certain amount we need. I need 7 hours and 42 minutes, according to my Oura ring. So we all have a certain amount of time we need. If you don't get that time, it's a debt that accumulates. Think of like a bank account. And if you withdraw and you're not putting enough back in, you're going to have a debt in your bank account. Bad idea. Same thing in your body with sleep. And so you actually can only pay that off by getting sleep. If you accumulate a sleep debt, You can only pay it off by paying back the sleep time. Now, sleep debt, you know, we all have a bit here and there, but it is important to remember that if you are carrying around sleep debt, you are getting more fatigued and you might not even know it. And so it's there in your mind. I've been traveling a ton. I opened my app this morning and I have 10 hours of sleep debt right now. Very bad. So my job this weekend is to bring my sleep debt down. But just be aware, like, how are you doing with that? Second thing, long days. So we have sleep debt. Long days is another cause of fatigue. So when you have a day that exceeds 16 hours, which is approximately what most people can function at, you could start to accumulate fatigue. Not everybody. Some people can go 17, 18, 20, 25. But most people, as we get past 16, you're going to start accumulating fatigue. And so it's good to be aware of, what is my schedule? Do I have these long days? Maybe you work a 10-hour shift, but you have to commute an hour on either end. And then you go home and you have children who have to have piano lessons and baseball and homework help. So thinking about your day and how much time you have, how long are you actually staying awake? And then the third factor is time of day. So we're worried about sleep debt, long days, and then time of day. Again, we talked about we are not nocturnal. So when we are awake during the middle of the night, especially what we call the wackle, which is the window of circadian low, and it's the time of night your body really needs to be asleep. If you are awake during that time of the night, it's a cause of fatigue. And so we have to be really aware, if that's happening, are we doing all the other things we can to minimize fatigue in the other places? And one thing I want to say about this is that it's not 1 + 1 + 1. So a little sleep debt plus a long day plus middle of the night, time of day, bad time of day. It's not like it's like 1 + 1 + 1. It's exponential. So if you have just sleep debt, but the other two are in a pretty good place, you're probably going to be okay. Probably. If if you have no sleep debt and you're getting a good solid 8 hours, but you're working at night, you might be okay. But if you have big sleep debt and long days and you're working in the middle of the night, you are exponentially increasing the chance for fatigue. And so that's where we want to be careful. And, we talk about schedules. Our flight and duty schedules can have an impact on all of these. And so if you're a scheduler, a manager, or even just as someone who gets assigned the schedule, understand that your schedule, thinking of commute time in there, has a big impact on these factors. Okay, so let's talk about fatigue science with sleep debt. So Pulsar did this study a long time ago, and it's showing the effects of sleep debt. So if you look at this chart, and you can see there's 4 colors of lines. I don't have like a little pointer, I would use that, but we did a study with 4 sets of people. So some people had 0 hours of sleep every day. Some people had 4 hours of sleep every day. Some had 6 hours and some had 8. So the darkest line there that's red is 0 hours a day. And then the green at the bottom is the most sleep. And so what we did is we had them in this facility and they took a PVT every so often, which is just a way of measuring, are you awake? And the goal was, how alert are these people? And as you can see, it was a 2-week study. The first group, the 0 hours a day, flunked out of the study at day 3. They couldn't even make it. Their alertness scores were off the charts. They couldn't even function. So they dropped out, which shows you that sleep debt that accumulates, it accumulated really fast with 0 hours. Then we have the next bar over, which is the 4 hours. And you can see again, the sleep debt accumulated. If you follow those dots and kind of follow the line, you can see, it was okay the first day or two, but as they started to go, their sleep debt got to a real high level, and they were impaired. We'll talk about it on the next slide, but when you're functioning at that high of a level, you are functioning as an impaired person. And that's scary to think about, making crazy hard decisions, making safety decisions, flying an aircraft, doing maintenance on a plane, on a helicopter in an impaired state. That's very scary. Then the orange shows you 6 hours. So you can see those who got 6 hours, their sleep debt grew and their scores grew, not as bad as the 4, but you can still see even 6 hours for most people is not enough. Most people, only about 15% of our population can handle 6 hours of sleep on a regular basis. And then you look at that last bar down there is the green bar. Those people had 8 hours, and for the most part, they did great. Their PVT scores, their alertness test never reached out of the normal range. Let's see. Okay, I'll talk on these bullet points really fast. So this was a study. So these studies lead to this study. This study led to what we have created is a biomathematical model, and there are other ones out there. And what those models do is they take a look at your schedule and they predict what's coming. So they'll say, you know, Joe had, this was his schedule. It can look at, so if you're, you know, let's say you use, I don't know, Aviation, port side, there's a ton of schedulers. Use a scheduling system. That scheduling system feeds into a model of any kind. There's lots of models, and the model will tell you, Joe worked this time, so we believe that at 2 a.m. tomorrow he's going to be at 12, and it just creates a curve, and you can see where the fatigue is high. You can see it here in this fatigue scoring system. It just gives you, you can see the numbers, the scale. Now that scales based on a PVT alertness test, but models can sometimes have the same, our model has the same levels. And so what's interesting is this, is see that if you look at that little chart there on the bottom, when you have fatigue, it is almost as if you are intoxicated. Now, obviously you're not, but it can have that same effect. And so imagine you're getting in a plane to fly and you have just had 3 drinks at the bar. I'm a lightweight. 1 drink would do me in. So I had 1 drink at the bar. I get in a plane and I'm going to fly. That is very scary. When we are fatigued, you tend to make riskier decisions. You don't have the same level of understanding. You'll tend to jump the gun on things. You'll skip steps on things. And so when we have sleep debt and long days paired together, you get this. And it's really scary. And so, you know, just thinking about this was a study done, but you just think about the operational risk. So if you look at this chart here on the right and you look at the very bottom, it says 3 times. So a person who has had 5 hours of average sleep per night and been awake for 22 hours at a time. So they have a sleep debt and they have long days. Essentially, it's as if they're legally drunk. 3 times the level of risk versus someone who has not done those things. It's unnecessary. So I think you're muted, Steve. We can't hear you. Or I can't hear you. No.
There we go. Thank you. I don't know if Catherine did that. Thank you so much. I had some background noise. I apologize. So let's talk about the importance of having those models. Is as Meredith said, is to do the estimate right in our scheduling, whether it's flight scheduling or work shift scheduling or what have you. So that's all about planning, right? No one plans to fail; they fail to plan. So if you can look at your flight schedules and minimize fatigue by design, then what you're doing is you're putting your flight and workforce in a good position for success in both its mission goals and from a fatigue and safety standpoint. So that's what we're talking about, designing the way you work to have less fatigue from the beginning. Madeline, you want to talk about some of the technologies that apply there?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's things you can do that are proactive, which is great because, you know, the reactive, we're reacting on the spot to a situation that's risen. But if we can actually get some of this taken care of ahead of time, it makes things smoother and better for your operation. I love saying it's not about saying we can't, it's saying we can. And if you look at these charts here on this paper or on this slide, you can see this is just some planning that happens. The schedule goes into the model and the model can help you understand who maybe is less fatigued. Can we shift some things around? Can we put this pilot in here, or maybe we need to augment a flight so we're safer? But what happens is you can look ahead of time and you can say, how can we make a better plan? I love how you said that. We don't plan to fail, we fail to plan. I love that. That's exactly it. We just plan ahead and we look at the model and we say, let's look at the next week and what can we do to shift things around so that we have less fatigue in our operations. That simple.
I'd like to add on that too, that, you know, Meredith talked earlier about integration to the scheduling systems. Fatigue is one of those problems where if you discover you have a fatigue problem an hour before flight time, the number of mitigation options that you have at your disposal is very few. Whereas if you're doing the planning early in the process, a couple days, couple weeks, now you've got time to explore all the different mitigations that Meredith was talking about. And the pilots have an opportunity to prepare themselves individually by getting good rest leading up to flight time and so forth, or a power nap the afternoon of a night flight, whatever the case may be. But again, if you don't discover a fatigue problem until right before flight, you have very few options to really help yourself out.
Yes. And it doesn't mean if you do discover it an hour before, you should ignore it. It's that whole, if you see something, say something. But it's much better if we can get ahead of it, just like anything. Okay, looking at designing fatigue out of your schedule. This is the model we were referring to. So if you take a look at this screen, you can see this little line, this little curve, that little orangish, yellowish, reddish line. That is a picture of our model. Now there's many models, but that's a picture of our model and what it looks like. And you can see that there's a flight there. You put the information in, and so it'll say, you know, I'm going from Dubai to Tokyo, and here's my flight times, here's the crew, and you can really get a plan. And everything, you know, what we like to do is color code things. So red means better pay attention. And if you notice something that's a color red, it's intentional to draw your eye and say, can we mitigate this ahead of time? Sometimes you can't. Sometimes, you know, I'm sure we've all dealt with situations where it's like, you can't tell me I'm not going, I'm going, so help me. But if you can mitigate stuff ahead of time, it makes things so much smoother. And so this is a picture of what the model looks like.
Great. So let's talk about some typical mitigation options for business aviation, right? It's not just one solution fits all. And as we talked about, the earlier you find these problems, the more opportunities you have. So let's talk about some of what we refer to as soft mitigations, things that might reduce the fatigue by about a point or two. Things like power naps during or in between flights and duties. Oftentimes, for example, you know, maintenance people will come and receive an airplane in the middle of the night. Well, you hate to have them work an entire day, and as Meredith pointed out, stay awake all the way until 1 a.m., then drive to the hangar, receive the airplane, and then drive home, right? They've been up for almost 24 hours. That's not good. So if they're going to come in the middle of the night, you know, take a power nap before you do that. Making sure you get good rest leading up to a flight or duty that's coming up, right? And one of the things that Meredith talked about too on the maintenance side was if you're working night shift, right? Making sure that on weekends, if you're going back to days to spend time with your family, you want to be very, very vigilant about and explicit about making sure your sleep is controlled so that you can transition back to nights and back to days in an effective way and not really put yourself at risk. And then things like caffeine, you know, that's there, but you have to be careful how you use that as well. And then from an organizational standpoint, sometimes just adjusting someone's schedule plus or minus 1 hour is super helpful to get that little bit of extra rest or mitigate, you know, high fatigue creeping up. So things like that are just, you know, again, the earlier you know about it and you can consider these things, it just makes a bit of a difference. Then you get the bigger mitigations, what we call hard mitigations. These are things that can really change the fatigue score by like 3 and 4 points, if not more. From a flight crew standpoint, you know, augmented crews. Right, so when you have a third crew member and someone can leave the cockpit and actually get a concerted nap in the middle of a flight and then wake up and come back to the controls, that's a huge benefit, right? Pre-positioning crews and or crew swaps, that's important too, but you got to be careful when you pre-position crews because the time zone effect and the circadian shift that happens on those people that positioned have to take effect in a way that when they now become the crew, they're flying at a time where their adjusted body clock is well suited. I've had situations where people have pre-positioned crews in the direction that's actually bad. So they pre-positioned crews into a situation which worsened the fatigue. That's obviously not the intent, but if you're not able to, you know, pay attention to stuff like that, it can actually get into a squirrely situation. As well as pre-positioning, how much time ahead do you have to go to really start to transition your circadian? I apologize for the background noise. But that's important too. You know, to pre-position to Europe, for example, it's like 6 time zones away. So you can need a couple days before you even start to get onto the European time zone from a body clock standpoint. Then you fly in Europe. So again, something like then scheduling plus or minus 3 hours of flight time changes, that really starts to affect the fatigue estimate as well. And that's just some other considerations from a work shift standpoint. Try to be consistent with your schedules. If people are day shift and night shift, that's fine because they can start to manage their own personal sleep patterns to make sure that they're consistent as they work within the confines that they're assigned. When you start doing days, then nights, then back to days, flipping to nights and back and forth, that just completely cripples people. It's really rough to do. Max duty times. You want to be mindful that, you know, that can happen from time to time, but that's something you should prepare for. If you think that on this Thursday you're going to have a max duty time, then you want to prepare for that. Get rested before Thursday so you can handle that max duty time. So things like that are, again, the earlier you know, the more you can prepare. I mentioned flip-flopping. That's something you want to try to avoid. And then sometimes a lot of organizations will have rest facilities either in the hangar or near the hangar so that crews they can sleep at the hangar or sleep at a resident hotel rather than having that hour and a half drive home in the middle of the night. And that way you protect your employee from falling asleep at the wheel, both inbound or outbound. And there are other kinds of things like that that could be considered as well. So let's talk a little bit about approaching flight time. And this is, again, you've gone through the scheduling, you've gone through the assessment of fatigue, and you've mitigated as much as you can with whether it's flight time changes or crew changes. But now you're getting close to flight time. And business aviation, as we all know, the schedule is not always exactly how we had intended it, right? So what I'm showing you here on the screen is a pre-flight risk control tool. And the little highlighted box there in orange shows you the estimated fatigue scores of every flight on that. And if you're using tools like Pulsar Informatics and you're doing the good rostering and planning, ideally that whole column is green, right? You've designed fatigue out of your schedule. But because schedules often change, whether it's the principals in the back, you know, have meetings or delayed whatever, or weather or mechanicals, you know, sometimes you have to change that, and that 2-hour delay, 3-hour delay could suddenly induce a fatigue problem. You want to have a pre-flight risk control process where that gets picked up. I like to say that if you use Pulsar tools, you're designing a house to not catch on fire. And if you have a good pre-flight tool like our tools, that's the fire alarm that goes off when there's a fire, because it could happen. So it's kind of a key delineator there. So it's really important to know how to prepare for flight and everything is well under control. Pop-up flights also induce changes from what was originally scheduled. Flight time changes, as I mentioned, and then personal life, right? Sometimes, you know, I might be assigned to a normal flight situation, and under normal conditions, I should have no fatigue whatsoever. But I might be caring for a newborn baby, I might be ill, I might have all kinds of other things going on in my personal life that I didn't get the amount of sleep that my body needs. I got less. And as Meredith said, you need to, you know, basically raise your hand and say, hey, you know, I was supposed to have a good night's sleep last night. I didn't. Maybe I shouldn't take the controls on this flight, or maybe depending on your operation, maybe you have an ability to actually, I think one of my friends, Jeff, likes to say, ran over the cat, which is an excuse that says I'm not ready for work today, and that's like a no questions asked. That's big enough deal that, you know, we'll get a replacement for you. So again, you have to be able to speak up if you're not able to do your personal due diligence and being prepared.
I have a friend in Arizona here who runs over her. She has a tortoise, like literally tortoise, and it lives under her car. It's 100 pounds, and she runs him over all the time. So when you see that, I think of like, did you run over the tortoise?
Yeah, sorry about that. I know we have some cat people on the call today, so I apologize if I insulted everybody.
No cats have been harmed.
So here's an important thing about your pre-work or pre-flight risk control processes or technologies. Same day changes, you need to really evaluate before you say yes. And what I mean by that is, let's say that you have a flight at, you know, say about 9 p.m. To take the boss back to the, you know, your home base airport. And your boss calls, you know, an hour before flight time and says, hey, my meeting's running long. Let's leave at, you know, 11:30 p.m. And let's say by design, leaving at 9, your fatigue was already going to be high. And now, before you say yes to the boss, you want to look, well, what's that 2.5-hour delay going to do to my fatigue score? And is that going to put it at a level that's just really, you know, putting the person in the back at risk as well as our crew at risk? So the whole idea is being able to assess the impacts of fatigue based on the same day change, so that before you say yes, you're doing so with eyes wide open relative to the risk you're taking. So again, the other phrase is know before you go, right? Understand what you're getting into and make good decisions based on science so that you can do that. And oftentimes, these objective fatigue scores that we've been talking about will be put into the ops manual for decision-making purposes. So if the score goes above a certain level, this is the protocol you follow, whether or not you fly, or who you have to get approval for, or what kinds of checks and balances have to be in place. So that really helps you with the people in the back to be able to say, hey, our fatigue level has gotten to a level where our ops manual says we can't fly today, or we leave in the morning instead. So these are things that, again, are sometimes subjective, and every company has a different threshold, but you want to prepare for this ahead of time. Then again, the whole idea of this is the earlier you're aware of potential problems, the more that the crews can be prepared. If you have a 9 o'clock flight and you find out at 4 in the afternoon that it's going to be moved to 11:30, well, what do you do between 4 and 11? Do you go sightseeing? Do you go run around town? Do you go out to dinner? No, you probably want to go back to the hotel, relax, get some extra rest, things like that to get yourself prepared for the later departure. And then again, if it's problematic, then you want to be careful about whether or not achieving the mission is worth the risk. And what you're seeing on the right there is a chart where if you make an adjustment in your risk control tools, you can see the impact of the fatigue change. And that way, again, you can assess before you accept. In this case, it moved by 3 hours, which reduced the fatigue by 4 points. So again, that's what you want to be able to do. And as I said, fire alarms need to go off, right? When there's a flight that's not supposed to have fatigue, and suddenly there is fatigue, you want the crews to be aware of it, but you also want management and dispatch to be aware of it as well, right? This shouldn't be just a singular person's subjective decision making. This should be a team-based approach. So it's very important that everyone's involved in that. And then, of course, notifications have to be sent out to the right people. And then the mitigation really has to take action. And as I said, we gave some examples earlier of some of the mitigations you can think about, and/or talking to the principals and saying, hey, sorry, what's being asked is just putting us into a really bad place. We want to keep this safe. We want to leave in the morning instead. Couple things to note here is when the fire alarms go off, people need to be able to look in the system and understand in English or in layman's terms what the issue is, and be able to then get to the bottom of it to make those appropriate adjustments. And then again, real-time decision-making is really important, and by a team. And as I'm pointing out here, we're flagging. In this case, our technology integrates to the Pulsar technology, so we're flagging that directly in the tool to be able to say, hey, according to the science, this is where the problem is.
Mm-hmm. One thing you can use is a PVT. So this is an objective test. It is not, you cannot get better at it. It is not something that as you learn, you're like, oh, I can game the system. This is a very valid, objective test of fatigue. Now, it's not measuring, I want to make sure it's clear. We're not measuring necessarily sleepiness. We're measuring if there are instability moments in your alertness. So wake state instability. Are you actually aware and awake and not having gaps of attention or lapses of attention? The PVT is used for many things. It's used to diagnose things like Alzheimer's and dementia. We at Pulsar use it to detect fatigue. So if you're having gaps in your attention or lapses in your attention, it will show up on this test. It's a reaction time test. It's not very fun and exciting, but it is effective. And so it's a quick test. It tells us, is your brain shutting down or not? And so if you pass this, then that's good. If you fail, that's a definite, we need to have a second look here. Just because you pass doesn't mean you're okay, but when you fail, that is a major sign. Lindsey Vaughn's coaches should have said, Lindsey, you just tore your ACL or whatever the injury was before. You should not do this. Same thing. If you fail a PVT, we need to definitely do something here.
Yeah, I think of this as almost like the breathalyzer for fatigue, right? So if the fatigue model in the estimate, in the risk control process says fatigue is high and the crews are feeling pretty good, this is an objective way to actually validate that, right? Mm-hmm. So if you say, well, geez, the model's predicting fatigue, but I took a PVT and my score is really low, well, okay, then maybe the model is being a little extra conservative, but I think we're in pretty good shape, we can go. But to what Meredith said, the other way is true, right? Where you start to feel fatigue, you take a test like this, it's like, whoa, fatigue is actually worse than the model is predicting, maybe because the pilot didn't get enough rest the night before, what have you. Again, it just makes it a little bit more specific, and it's an actual test versus an estimate. So it serves as a backstop to the process.
And one thing I want to point out is when you're fatigued, sometimes you don't know you're fatigued. That can be a symptom, which is a bad cycle. And so just because you feel okay doesn't mean you are. So if the model's saying you're at a 16, it's worth validating that, because you may feel okay, but you may not be.
Good point. Good point. So let's talk about now the work is done, whether it was a flight or work shift in the maintenance hangar, whatever the case may be. You want to be able to break it down to, what went right and what could have been done differently, and was there fatigue at all at play there. So let's talk a little bit about that. So again, debriefing the plan versus actual is important, because when there's a difference between what actually happened versus what was planned, that's what you really want to address, right? So what was the predicted fatigue level? Right, and how did I feel? Did if it said it was going to be a fatiguing flight, was it? And where did I feel that I was performing in that that flight? Did I feel worse than I thought I was, or better? And that's important, because everybody's a little bit different, right? Some people might be night owls, some people might be morning people. So if you have two crew members flying together, and I'm a morning person, I might fly the morning leg, whereas Meredith might be a night owl and she'll fly the evening leg. So I mean, it's an opportunity to kind of talk with your people that you work with to just be a team and put each other in position for success, right? When you're debriefing too, were there any fatigue-related aspects to today's performance? Maybe you missed some call-outs. Maybe you're a little delayed in settings, or making adjustments in flight, or doing a repair on an engine, or whatever the case may be. Being able to capture that is not a sign of weakness. It's being a proactive, reporter of a near miss, that, today it didn't produce a problem, but tomorrow it could. And if you prepare for it differently tomorrow, then you're reducing the likelihood of a problem creeping up, which really gets to, could I have prepared better? So when you're debriefing, ask yourself, is there anything you could have done to have been better prepared for what you just did, whether it was a flight or a work shift, and use that information on subsequent flights or work shifts. Could the organization have achieved the mission with a different approach, right? So this, I'll use this more from a flight perspective, but was this one where we should have pre-positioned instead of augmented? Did we even need to augment? Could we have done it with two? Could we have gotten the principal to Europe without even flying overnight well enough in time to let them be prepared for their meetings? So there's things like that. The mission is to get somebody to a destination. Unless there's a hard and fast, I have to be at a destination by 12:02 p.m., then maybe you give yourself a little bit more latitude. And then everyone is different. So as Meredith pointed out earlier, sleep times are different. So is fatigue, right? So individuals, when they see an objective score, have an ability to sort of self-calibrate themselves. I'll be the first person to tell you that if I see a fatigue score for myself in the range of 10 or higher, I'm a pumpkin, completely useless. But other people can function pretty well at higher fatigue levels. And other people, that threshold of 10 is considerably lower before they're pretty well affected. So by everyone doing the work, knowing what the fatigue estimate was, and seeing kind of how they're feeling and performing, they start to be able to understand that, if I said to Meredith, you're going to perform tomorrow's flight at a score of 10, in her mind, she's going to be like, oh, geez, a 10, I'm useless at a 10. Let me prepare differently. And that's kind of the key message.
One thing you said, Steve, was so good, and I want to make sure we drive that point home, is fatigue doesn't equal weakness. If you admit fatigue or you spot fatigue, that doesn't mean weakness. It's actually a sign of strength to say, this is a problem. And so sometimes we've had people say, well, I don't want to admit it. Admit it. It's better than a crash. So that was a good point.
And that's a great lead into the slide, exactly. So in your safety management system, this is where reporting near misses and bad stuff is important, just for the exact reason that Meredith just stated. So if I'm in this example on the screen here, if I'm submitting a report about what I perceive to be fatigue on today's flight, there may not have been anything negative happening on that flight. It may have been a perfect landing. Everything went exactly according to plan on the surface. But as a pilot here, I am basically, reporting that, that was a little, it went well, but there was this underlying problem that I think we should at least consider. So when you submit something like this gives the organization an opportunity to look at that. How was that flight crewed? How did we prepare? Is there anything we could have done differently so that this kind of report would not be something that would get popped up on a future flight under similar conditions? So reporting this stuff is super important, not just when the bad stuff happens. And I kind of touched on each of these different things as well. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about big picture oversight, both from an SMS standpoint and from an FRMS standpoint. It's one thing to look at flight by flight. It's another organizationally to step back and see all of what's going on in your crews, right? So Meredith, talk a little bit about this element.
Yeah, so we can do what we call a snapshot or a retrospective. So we can take a look at how did things go the last month, and we can do some comparisons. And we can do things like, you know, at what point in the night do we see the worst fatigue as a company? And then for this individual, where was your highest fatigue? Where did you seem to have the lowest fatigue? And what we do is we just go back and we learn about you, but we also learn what were the things people said. Were people saying, hey, this was a rough shift? Maybe we collect some information and say, okay, this shift clearly is the sticking point for our company. So you can go back and you can learn a lot from looking at data, schedules. Were things better than you thought they were going to be? Were things worse than you thought they were going to be? Sometimes things aren't what you think they're going to be. And so it's very helpful just to look back and say, you know, how did things go? And then could we do things differently? Could we have done something to mitigate better ahead of time? You know, it's great to have the PVT for the last minute, but you don't want to have to use it if you don't, right? Like we want to plan ahead, we want to build the house and then have that fire alarm, as Steve was saying. And so if we're doing a good job with that, how do we continue to do better? I think that that's really important to take a look at.
Right, and I think I also add that when you do this sort of retrospective, this is the foundation upon which you write the rules that are in your ops manual. When you come up with your duty rest guidelines, it's based on this, right? So if your duty rest guidelines are producing all sorts of fatigue reports, then clearly you should look at and review your duty rest guidelines to adjust it. And if you can adjust your duty rest guidelines and then go retrospectively look at your fatigue and see that, oh, that actually made a positive impact, well, then you did the right thing in your procedures, right? So again, this all gets back to organizational process improvement. And that ties into safety itself. So it's not only just tracking fatigue, but it's also tracking how did fatigue manifest itself in safety. So when you're in your SMS, again, you should be tracking, you know, not only where did fatigue creep up, but is it trending, right? So are your duty rules or pre-flight planning procedures actually working? And if I'm seeing charts like this, where I'm constantly having fatigue all the time, that's either, you know, something that I need to get ahead of with our crews, right? Let's make sure everyone is fully on board with making sure that they get enough rest before their flight time. Let's consider the way we're crewing and the way we're scheduling flights. Do we need more people? Can we ask the principals whether, you know, changing flight times is something they can accommodate in their travel schedules? And the reason you would have that discussion is to say, because we want to keep you safe. Because what you're asking induces fatigue can produce safety incidents. We want to make these changes. If you can accommodate that, it's you helping us help you. And when you have objective data to substantiate that conversation, you'll find that the conversation oftentimes is quite a bit different than without having this kind of data. And again, should adjustments be made, which is really important. And then again, from your SMS, keeping track, just like you were seeing in Meredith's chart earlier about, you know, fatigue retrospective, in your SMS, you should be seeing, you know, is fatigue or the number of fatigue-related events still prevalent in what you're seeing in the reports. And whether you're seeing things like the heat map or whether you're seeing things like the bar chart there, if fatigue continues to be the #1 causal factor that's always present in all the different events that are happening, then clearly something's not working. And you need to be a little bit more proactive about addressing that. Again, if you do address it and there's fewer issues, that's better. And then again, this isn't just for flight crews. I hope we've given some good examples about maintenance and even schedulers too, right? Schedulers do a lot of late night work with back of the clock type operations. While they might be working from home, not always, and you need to be mindful of that as well, right? Receiving an airplane at 4 a.m. and then expecting your maintenance crew to be back at the hangar by 8 a.m., that's kind of unrealistic, right? So you need to accommodate things like that as well. Yeah. And then benchmarking, right? One of the things that's really important, many of you may participate in various forums or groups, and whether or not you have an SMS that enables benchmarking, you can see like, well, are we experiencing more fatigue than others, given the same mission, perhaps? And if the answer is, you know, we're doing the same thing as everybody else, but our fatigue is off the charts, well, what are they doing that seems to be working that we might be able to adopt? learning from others is a very big part of business aviation. So again, are you leading or lagging the pack is really the message, and what are you going to do about it, more importantly. So that kind of wraps up our presentation, and I want to open up for questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve and Meredith. Great discussion on this. I do have one question talking about the, looking back and evaluating things, but specifically is, can you talk a little bit about why it is, and this is in caps, so important to start your evaluation with a 3-day look back?
Meredith, do you want to handle that, or you want me to do it?
You go first. I want to think through the 3-day thing.
Yeah, so you want to look back in time because you have to capture the sleep debt component, right? So if for example, you came off a weekend and we're analyzing fatigue on a Monday, in an ideal world, the professional person working for you, got their rest on weekends and they show up on Monday fresh and ready to perform. If on the other hand, we're analyzing something on a Wednesday and they had heavy flying Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you can imagine that the Wednesday fatigue is going to be quite a bit different, right? It's going to be affected by the fact that you've been working 3 days, you've got a heavy workload for 3 days, and then you factor in, particularly if you're a pilot, you may have flown across multiple time zones in the last couple of days. So now you have circadian adjustment that has to be affected into the fatigue component as well. So looking back in terms of fatigue estimate is important to make sure that you're grabbing those top 3 things that Meredith alluded to earlier.
And I prefer to look back farther.
Yeah, right.
Patterns. Patterns will emerge, and especially with schedules, a lot of times, I'm thinking of maintenance workers. A lot of times they're 4 on, 4 off, or 5 on, 4 off, and then it flips, and then you have a pattern. So being able, 3 days at least, but being able to look back and really identify patterns is helpful for future planning, I believe.
Great points. Especially the patterns. I would imagine that if you've got something going on that's pretty consistent, that's a good thing to know about. Related, I guess, to that look back, and I think this is an interesting question. This is from someone who's in South Florida, seeing more heat illness related incidents. And I know that it's an interesting thing about environment, temperatures and all of that, and impact on fatigue. What are your thoughts about that?
So I live in Arizona, Phoenix, and it's actually over 100 today. They forgot that it's March here, but I understand the impact of that. And actually, we were just talking with some helicopter operations that happen out here, and talking about inside the cabin of some of the helicopters in the summer, it gets to be 120 plus, and these pilots are flying in this really high temperature cabin. Yes, we believe that temperature does have an impact on fatigue. However, what we're looking at and what we showed you does not accommodate for that. So it's not that it's not there. It is definitely a factor, but the schedule and the biomathematical models we were talking about account only for schedule. Those do not account for other factors. Now, this is where I would say it comes into play that if you feel it, you say something, or if you see something, you say something. You may not be able to objectively say, I'm fatigued by a test or by a model because of heat. But if you are that in bad shape, you need to say something. But yes, heat does impact it. And as of right now, that's something we're actually looking at and figuring out how can we do better with this piece.
I'd like to answer the question more from a risk control standpoint, and what I mean by that is if the work you're about to do is such that it already has a fatigue estimate that's high, and then you layer on top of that heat, and then you layer on top of that some weather condition, and then you layer on top of that a whole bunch of other types of hazard conditions, suddenly that's going to affect your decision making. If you've got high fatigue and it's clear in a million and no big deal, okay, I can cope with a little bit of fatigue. But if you've got elevated fatigue and then all these other things compiled on it, your risk controls should be used to flag that and perhaps say, no, there's too many things going on here. We just don't want to do that. So whether or not heat induces the additional fatigue stress, the fact that there is heat as a hazard should sort of work together with the fact that there's fatigue and perhaps other things that you should pick up in your pre-work or pre-flight risk controls.
A really good point.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for that. Another question on with this model, how does it account for people being different, right? Individual difference or the unique sort of constitution of different people?
Sure, absolutely. So it is an average. It is not something that obviously we don't take each person and say, okay, we'll build a model based on you. It's 90+% accurate. So the first thing is it's not 100% accurate. It can't be. It's an average of the population, but it is pretty good. It is pretty close. It's over 90% accurate. So, you know, that's why you have to take other things into account. You can't just rely on the one number. Now, it's not going to be, you know, it's probably not going to be if you're a 16, it tells you you're a 4. It might be if you're a 16, it tells you you're a 15. It's close. It's not exactly perfect. One thing you can do to consider is wearables. Often, as we're getting into this space of tech growing in our society, wearables give you an action. You can connect wearables to models and you can actually get a real score. But I want to say that it is not perfect. It does not account for commuting. It does not account for age. It does not account if you're a man or a woman or you have blue hair. It doesn't account for any of that. It just literally is an average of the population. So while it's not perfect, it's still pretty good.
Yeah, and I like to add a kind of a risk control flair on that as well, right? The goal here is not to be perfect because it's hands off from the pilot standpoint, right? It is approximating fatigue based entirely from the flight and duty schedule, which is great because the minute you ask the pilot to wear something or fill out forms or tell us how much you slept, number one, that's extra work nobody wants to do. Number two, if they don't fill it out in earnest, you have to question whether it's actually high quality or useful. And then as soon as you have to question if it's useful, the whole thing kind of goes out the window. So having a good enough estimate to flag a potential issue, I like to equate to like a weather forecast, right? If I tell you that it's 80% chance of thunderstorms in Atlanta, okay, I'm still going to fly to Atlanta. I'm just going to adjust how I'm going to do it. In the same way, if the Pulsar models are saying, hey, this flight has a pretty high fatigue score, that doesn't mean it's absolute, but what it does do is put a big flag that says, look here, make sure you're paying attention to this so you can make appropriate adjustments and get your mission accomplished by mitigating as much as you can. So that's really the goal here. It's not to be perfect. If you want to be perfect, you'd have to wire up pilots and all kinds of crazy stuff, and nobody wants that. This is supposed to be unobtrusive, good enough to make good decisions.
That's great.
All right, thanks. I have one more question well, actually two more questions and a comment. There is some requests here to get like a copy of the fatigue blood alcohol image and that sort of thing. So I just want to point out to everyone that Stephen Meredith's email contact is here on this slide. And I would say, please feel free to get in touch with them for that sort of thing. If you want any part of the presentation, I'm sure they'd be happy to discuss that with you. One quick question, is the PVT an app that is available for flight crew use?
The PVT is an app. It is on any phone, tablet, Apple, Android, doesn't matter. But it is available for not just flight crew, but for maintenance, ground ops, anyone safety sensitive. So it's not just for flight crews, but yes, it is available for flight crews through Pulsar. So you can't just download it, unfortunately, but if you know, reach out to me if you are interested. But yes, it is an app.
Okay, there you go. So then Meredith's contact information is right there. So reach out to her for that. And then last, what would you say is the biggest improvement an operator can make to be better prepared to handle fatigue risk?
I'll start and let Steve wrap it up because Steve's the master here. So I would say pay attention to yourself. The one thing you can do, know when you're fatigued. And by doing that, by paying attention to how much sleep am I getting, what is my schedule, how do I feel when I wake up, what is my sleep need, and learn your sleep need if you don't know it. Pay attention and be self-aware. And if you're self-aware walking into something, you can signal when you aren't well. That would be my biggest takeaway, is just pay attention and be self-aware.
Yeah, and I would just pretty much piggyback on that, and I think everyone being on today's call and just being aware of all the things that can affect fatigue, not only can that help you as an individual person, be more mindful of your rest so that you're prepared for duty, but you can start to look at the flight schedules and the work schedules and so forth in a way that you might not otherwise have. And then also, I think hopefully just being more open to the fact that fatigue is a safety risk and communicating amongst each other within the crew. Like I said earlier, if I'm a morning person and Meredith's a night person, I should say to her, hey, why don't I fly the morning leg and you fly the night leg? And just being open about that, right? So I mean, there's no shame, there's no badge of honor because you flew. It's about just doing your best to be prepared as an individual, but then working together as a team to account for the fact that fatigue is a real thing.
All right. Thank you both so much. Really, just as always, great information, lots of food for thought about how to do this and some new ways to kind of go about handling and understanding our own levels of fatigue and how that works and doesn't work in our organizations. Thank you all so much for your expertise and for the tools. Anybody who's interested, please feel free to contact Steve or Meredith or give us a call here at IBAC. And I put the link to the webinars. You'll find the recording for this session there, as well as future recordings. We have our whole series with Polaris set up for the spring, so I hope to see you there. Thanks again, Steve and Meredith, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.